Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I am Angelica Marino, and I am the Stewardship Manager of the American College Center for Military and Veterans Affairs. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's online webinar, A Soldier-Citizen Recipient's Perspective, Value of Military Members to the Financial Services Industry. As we wait for folks to sign on, we have a few announcements to share. If you have any questions throughout the discussion, please enter them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If time allows, we will have a Q&A session toward the end of the webinar and try to answer as many questions as we can. It is my pleasure to turn it over to Phil Easton, our Executive Director of the American College Center for Military and Veterans Affairs.
Thank you, Angelica. Let me start by welcoming each of our attendees and introducing our very special guest today. Admiral Michael Mullen, U.S. Navy retired, served our nation for 43 years. He retired as the 17th chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff for Presidents Bush and Obama from 2007 to 2011. He has served on corporate boards from 2013 to 2019 and continues to serve on numerous other boards. He is the president of MGM Consulting and was the college's 2003 Soldier Citizen Award recipient. Admiral Mullen, thank you so much for your service to our nation and for joining us today. It is an absolute honor to have you here with us. I first want to congratulate you again on receiving the 2023 Soldier Citizen Award. I know you know, but for our audience's consumption, this award celebrates military leadership, industry success, and the greatness of American society. The recipient is recognized as someone who has protected the freedoms of our society in the armed forces and subsequently enhanced society as a citizen. So once again, Admiral, congratulations. So for my first question, I wanted to know and ask you, what does this award mean to you?
Well, thanks, Phil, and thanks to you and your team for leading a really special organization and a very impactful organization, and one that has, I think, great potential for our military and for our veterans and their spouses. I really do appreciate it. I was obviously honored, a little bit surprised, but honored last fall to get this award. I had participated in one other clam bake a few years ago and never really thought that I would be have an opportunity to receive an award such as this. And it was a very special night for lots of reasons, mostly because of the young people that were there. There were an awful lot of veterans there, and there were an awful lot of those who had benefited by virtue of attendance at an association with your organization. And that's, to me, what this is really all about. This is investing and giving back and taking advantage, quite frankly, of a former military population, a veteran population that wants to continue to give, as their spouses do, who bring great capability, great skills to the civilian workforce. And you provide a tremendous channel to be able to do that. So it was very special to be honored in that regard. And I look forward to continuing to support as best I can what you're doing in the future.
Awesome. And no one better to be recognized than you. You talk about someone that is the epitome of character, service, and sacrifice, both in uniform and out. So once again, sir, congratulations.
Thanks.
So on to, you're more than welcome. So as you know, transition can be extremely challenging for our military community. And our center is really focused on transitioning personnel and making a smooth transition from active duty, Guard, Reserve, veterans, and for their spouses. And I know many of our listeners would really appreciate learning of the opportunities and challenges you personally experienced during your transition. Can you speak a little bit to that, Admiral?
Well, I'd back it up a little bit. During the wars, I got much more intimately involved with the Veterans Administration, if you will, than we normally would do on active duty. And part of that became what was happening, particularly to those who were wounded, who were being turned over to the VA, and what did their future look like. And as a result of that, started to engage in the veteran space with leaders across the country. But when I started this in 2008 or 9, that time frame, there wasn't much of a playbook. Our culture on the active duty side is one that essentially says our investment in you is the time you've been in the military in terms of transition and what your future is. It's the time you've been in the military. It's the skills you've learned. It's the leadership capabilities. It's the technical capabilities. It's whatever your rate or MOS is, and that's associated with that. But we don't think on the active duty side about how to help you transition. Yes, all the services have transition teams and have transition requirements, but the leadership doesn't focus on that. And to me, as I became more knowledgeable about this, particularly when I was chairman, that just wasn't enough. And then when I retired, what I learned, and I remember I did something back in the day called Conversations with the Country, very focused on this area. And I can remember being in Morgantown, West Virginia, and at the end of this presentation about veterans and transition and how great they were, the mayor came up to me and says, well, how do I do this? And we just didn't have much of a playbook or any ideas on, any specifics other than what I said. They're ready to go. But since that time in 2010, we've really put together a playbook. So we understand a lot more about transition. And I'm very pleased, quite frankly, to be able to talk to it today, as well as it's the hardest part of the space, if you will, because these are enormously talented young men and women who want to continue to give, who they're young, and there are some 250,000 who transition to veterans status every single year. And so what we did find was how challenging that transition space is. And so focusing on that, and what I really broke it down into 3 areas through a paper that my staff and I put together called A Sea of Goodwill. The underpinning concept is that there's nothing but goodwill out there on the part of the American people to support those who serve. How do you connect that goodwill with the individuals, particularly as they transition? And we broke it down into education, basically education, jobs, and health. And when I say jobs, I almost hesitate to do that because it really should be careers, not jobs. And of course, that's where the American College comes in and what you do comes in, because this is about careers. But getting across that bridge, if you will, is hugely challenging. And equally important has been the requirement to make sure we focus on spouses. Half the force is married. I know you know that as a former senior enlisted chief, and these are typically, they want to be 2-income families. So, and that's just another great resource pool of talent. The other aspect that's been going on now, really since the pandemic, is we've been short of people across the country in terms of skill sets. And so that makes this both opportunity and requirement that much more significant. So if we broke it down into education, health, and employment, those 3, certainly the education piece is really critical. And while, and you might be interested in my transition, I was interested in it, but quite frankly, my transition was a whole lot different than the vast majority of those who are getting out of the military. And where I've tried to focus my efforts is on the E4s, 5s, and 6s who are transitioning, whether they're in 4 years or 10 or 15 or 20. That's the heart of who we are. That's the pyramid. That's the middle of the pyramid, in the chain of command, if you will. And they're the ones that carry the load. They're the ones that make us great. So how do we focus on that group as they try to figure out what's next in their lives? And that idea of education, health, and employment has really stood the test of time. You hit 2 of those pillars very clearly, for which I'm very grateful. And you hit it in an area that's difficult because we don't know much about financial services, in our military, unless we have some background. So that makes, again, this kind of focus and sustaining this over time that much more important. I'll tell you 1 or 2 things that happened to me in transition. I was so tired that I basically said I was going to go to bed for a year. And for the most part, I did. Now, I like to teach. We all do that. You know, all of us who grow up training, getting educated in the military, we have an affinity to teach. So the only thing I did the first year I retired was I put together a course and I taught at Princeton, which I did for 6 years. And then I've transitioned in the last 5 to teach seniors here at Annapolis, a leadership course. But the first year, that really was all I did. And then I started to connect. Key for me, I think key for anybody in transition, among other things, and I can talk as you'd like about other aspects of transition, but key is you've got to have a network. Monday morning after you go, the phone doesn't ring, you don't have a schedule, nobody's knocking on the door. Even for somebody like me, you have to have a network. People need to know you're out there, and connecting to that network, connecting to your old colleagues who transitioned before you, particularly in this area, connecting with veterans organizations who are focused on this, just like you, connecting with veterans themselves, some of the sponsors of what you do are very senior people in very big organizations who are veterans themselves. They're looking for ways to help veterans move forward. So along those lines, you know, that there are many things tied to a good transition, but to me, that is key, is recognizing how hard it is, going somewhere, connecting with people who have done it, and then almost, you know, choosing what you want to do. And that's another thing I just recommend. I mean, going somewhere where you really want to go, because you don't want to be waking up every single day doing something you don't want to do, and making sure that we're also connecting with the spouses because they also have great skills.
No, that's awesome. You talked about education, you talked about jobs, health, networking, but spouses. I really appreciate you bringing up spouses, because a lot of times in these discussions ends up being just speaking about the active duty member, right? And when we talk about transitioning here within our Center for Military and Veterans Affairs, we're talking about that E4, you know, the one that only spent maybe 4 years or 6 years, but also those that may have been in a different career field. You know, maybe they were aircraft maintainer in the Air Force, and now they've retired or separated, and now they want to transition into financial services.
Right.
And you spoke about our spouses, right? We can't say enough about how important our spouses are, and that we need to go out of our way to make sure that we're supporting them. And like you said, 2 of those 3 pillars. You know, so you talked about 2010 and versus 2023, 24. Not much has changed as far as the challenges for our military members, Guard, Reserve veterans, and spouses. I mean, there's still some, you know, challenges as far as their networks are concerned. You know, branding is one of the things that we've heard from our scholars, of things that they're challenging with, which is similar to what you're talking about. And then, of course, our spouses. So we do take care of the education piece of it, which can lead to careers within financial services. But you spoke to everything that is on our service members' minds and their spouses and those veterans as well. So your experience is wide and varied. How do you think your military leadership experience, the things that you learned, the tools you learned while you were in uniform, you know, how did that help you as you transition to your future civilian career jobs?
Well, again, I didn't have a job per se. I was engaged in other activities, but I mean, I'm much older than most people that transition at that point in time. And I made a conscious decision. Actually, one of the things I did is I made a list of what I didn't want to do and what I did want to do. And I did that ahead of time, and did so in a way that, so when I had an opportunity or someone would call me, if it was on the didn't want to do list, it was pretty easy to say, no, that's just something I don't want to do. And I'll be specific. I was given an opportunity to work in the defense industry. For many years, I had been a budget and program guy before I rose to the most senior positions. And I just didn't want to work with Lockheed and Raytheon and General Dynamics. They're great organizations, but I wanted, part of my own ethos is, throughout my life and one of the reasons I love the military so much is I was able to grow throughout my time in the military. I never did the same. I never had a repeat day. And I had great days and I had bad days, but I never had a repeat day. I was around extraordinary people. That's what kept me in originally. But I was always looking to grow. I'm insatiably curious, and so I wanted to go somewhere that I hadn't been before. And then those skills, the question is, do those skills translate? Well, I'm more than anything else, I just believe in leadership. And leadership, believe me, I've been in the private sector now for a dozen years, and believe me, leadership is every bit as important there as it is as it was in the military. So those leadership skills, the taking responsibility, holding myself to account, the being, somebody that is involved in a team, somebody that's, going somewhere with an outfit that's got a mission. We bring, we in the military, right down to the most junior person, we bring skills that are really valued in the private sector. Timeliness of, being there when we need to be there. We're loyal, we're dedicated, we're thirsty. By and large, we're young. I wasn't, but by and large, we're young. And we want to be part of a team, and we can really make a difference in that regard. And these days, certainly more so than even 10 years ago or 12 years ago when I retired, technically adept, in terms of technical skills. So there's just an awful lot there. But I really mean what I said earlier about you need to really get engaged in an area that you're really turned on by. And I want to be very specific about jobs and careers. Too many of our veterans are, I'll call it underemployed. They've got jobs, but they're not satisfied, and they're working far below their potential. So outfits have to really have to do your due diligence. Is how do you break into an outfit that's going to give you a career? And one of the things we've learned, and I take your point about the challenges are still there, but as a Vietnam guy myself, believe me, the landscape now is much different in terms of support for veterans than it was back then. Although there still are those that get scared off by the stories about post-traumatic stress and mental health and that kind of thing. And yes, we have those challenges, but those are minimal challenges. I mean, they are a minimum percent of the veteran space. 95% plus of our vets, just don't have those kinds of challenges. And what I've seen in these wars and at the end of these wars is a great deal of support for our men and women who've served. So again, it's cracking the code to get into a place like JP Morgan. And I was engaged with their CEO early, and they didn't get it right early. When they did get it right, they started by having a coterie of veterans inside the organization that knew the language, that understood how difficult transition was, that could map a military skill to a civilian skill. Once that happened, JP Morgan and many others, they've hired and been in a network that have hired hundreds of thousands of vets because of the leadership there. You need to go somewhere where you have a leader that cares about this space, quite frankly. And then back to careers, not jobs. That's where the education thing, I think, is so key. I mean, the data has shown forever that you have an opportunity with a higher level of education, an increased economic opportunity over your life. It's not for everybody, and I understand that. And there are very high-paying skilled jobs that don't require degrees. But at the same time, it was pretty rare that I ran into young men and women in the military who didn't want to advance themselves, who didn't want to improve their education. So it's a good fit in the veteran space, and to take advantage of the GI Bill, which is a very robust bill. It's crazy not to do that from my perspective, and to be able to pass it on to your kids. If you don't use it, I mean, those are tremendous opportunities for everybody. So that, I mean, a myriad of skills, back to your question, Phil, that I found when I counsel young ones about their future, the one thing I tell them is take the toughest job you can take, because that's going to get you ready for the future, because the future is going to be challenging, and you have to have an appetite for change, because the landscape, you can see just how fast the landscape is changing. What are the skill sets that are required? So I've told young ones for a long time, don't plan your life on 25 years through a straw that's, never going to change, because at some point in time, someone's going to come in and cut that straw off. You need multiple skills, and to be able to adjust over time, as far as I'm concerned.
No, I love where you started off and all the advice you gave, but I love the way you started off, which was about making sure you understand what your purpose is and write a list of things you don't want to do and write a list of things that you want to do. Because in the military, we don't have that choice a lot
Yeah,
of times, the
that's
majority of
true.
the time. I came in the military to be medical and aircraft
Yeah,
maintenance. Here I ended, right?
yeah, yeah.
So you get the opportunity, when you separate or you retire, to figure out exactly what your purpose is, what you enjoy doing, and this is a great opportunity to do that. And I love the nuggets that you gave, and why military and the military experience that you had was so great as you transition. Just the leadership, just the leadership we get out of our E4s is much different than what the leadership that a company would get after someone working for them after 4 years, because of what we ask them to do and all the technical training that we get and the work ethic and the timeliness and the team building. All those attributes are very important. So thanks for that, Admiral. So as we transition to our next question, so I know you have tremendous impact in serving with a wide array of nonprofit organizations dedicated to improving growth, development, recovery, and transition of military veterans and their families. Could you expand on your role and your firsthand experience, either in assisting or improving the process of someone transition, not within your space that you've been in post military?
So part of my counsel on 501c3s, on organizations, volunteer organizations that make such a difference, is for all of us, and I counsel my colleagues who are still retiring, obviously very senior individuals. You just need to get, in my view, is you need to get your life organized on what you're going to be doing professionally before you kick in and do a lot of things for 501c3s. They're all good. They all have different missions, and you ought to, if you get involved in one, you should get in one you understand's got a good mission, back to what I said earlier. But they can also really, really draw a lot of your time. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that my counsel would be to get the rest of your life organized before you really jump into that space, because it can take an awful lot of time. For me, I had a couple of opportunities. One was with an outfit called the Cohen Veterans Network, and this is a really instructive story. Steve Cohen, who was a billionaire that obviously made a lot of money, part of it he didn't, and had a very successful business on the financial side. He didn't know anything about the military until his son joined the Marine Corps and went to Iraq, and all of a sudden now he and his wife are spending a lot more time on the military. And what I found was how many individuals like that there are, that we need. This is part of us messaging those who know nothing about us. As well as I, Phil, we've gotten a lot smaller. We're pretty good at talking to ourselves. We're an all-volunteer force, so we're further and further away from the American people, and that's a danger for me. I could spend a lot of time talking about that, but that's where Steve was. Then once we got into the wars, and Steve became more familiar, he wanted to start a 501c3 to focus on mental health for military and veterans and family members. So he started something called the Cohen Veterans Network, which we started with almost nothing, and basically to focus principally on mental health. And now, this is probably 7-8 years ago, now we have upwards of 25 mental health clinics across the country, which offer free mental health care for military and veterans and their families. And I don't have to tell you, as a former, Chief Master Sergeant, what that means, because we have mental health challenges in the military as well, and we're dramatically short of providers, both in the military and in civil society. So And then once I get into this to find out the totality of the requirement and what CVN is doing, in addition, I also learned that if you're going to set up a veterans outfit to support it, to be effective, in my view, it needs to be a one-stop shop for everything, because veterans come in on their own cycle, their own time. They may make one stop at a place, and you better, in addition to employment, have a counseling piece, have a family piece, have a training piece, have an education piece, whatever the case might be. They all don't have to be sitting at the desk, but you better have contacts, if you will, that can connect a veteran for that time that they check in. So that was one outfit, and that was an early learning for me as well, the sort of one-stop shopping, which I started up in New York City with Cohen, but as I found that to be true in everything that I've been involved in. And the other big place I've been involved in, my wife and I were born and raised in Los Angeles, so we've spent a fair amount of our time on the West LA Veterans Center, hospital and campus that was given by a family back in 1887 to be used for veterans, and found it to not be used well. It's not very far from the UCLA campus. We got a lot of UCLA medical and veteran medical interface there at the UCLA hospital. So there was a lot to do there. And clearly, in that part of the world, veterans homelessness is a huge issue. So we're actually building, we've built 233 homes for vets on this campus. We're going to build that up to 1,700 plus. It's been an enormously challenging bureaucratic process, really trying to focus on the veterans homelessness issue there. And it's representative. We actually hope to build this campus, and it's a campus. It's not just for homes. It's a place where vets can go, where individuals, they can be treated medically, yes, but where individuals with the same background can have a cup of joe and have that shared experience that only veterans understand. And it's in a very expensive part of LA. So how do you make all that happen when prices are going up in that part of town? But we're building that campus. Hopefully within the next 5+ years, we will have built it up for almost 2,000 vets, in the area, if you will, of the 4,000 or 5,000 homeless vets that are in LA County specifically. So those are two big pieces. The last one I'd mention, and this is what drives me. I can't tell you, I'm sure you did it, how many families, how many moms and dads, how many funerals my wife and I went to during the wars. And the message, either overtly or covertly, that you get from families is, please don't forget my son or my daughter. Don't forget their sacrifice. And that's what drives me. And what I've said, what a message that I said to them, to those families, is, we won't forget. And Deb's the same way. Until we can't breathe, that's what we're going to do, because of the sacrifice of those who paid the ultimate price. And so my wife, Deb, is still on the board of TAPS, which is a tragedy assistance program for survivors, where we have lots of Gold Star families, but really TAPS provides services for any family that's lost a member, that's died while serving on active duty, and has evolved from a small group in the late 90s to basically engage over 100,000 family members right now, and what they do for kids and what they do for families. And the two things that are big drivers in losing people right now, one is suicide, but the biggest one, quite frankly, are burn pits, from the wars, the cancers that are associated with that. So my wife is really the lead in our family with respect to TAPS, but I also try to help there when I can. So those are three of, I do some other things as well, but those are kind of the three big ones.
Well, we can see where your passion is, right? As the chairman, and then post-career, just continue to helping those our veterans, their spouses. You talked about it in the very beginning, 250,000 transitioning out each and every year. We have a lot of homeless. We have a lot with mental health challenges, and the work that you're doing on both coasts, right? On the East Coast and on the West Coast, with the West LA Veterans Organization. And, like you said, they just don't want us to forget, and we won't. And we won't, and part of our mission, like I talked about, transitioning as far as into financial services, is to reduce suicides, increase employment, right? And make sure that nothing in their transition contributes to any mental health challenges that they may already have, right?
Yeah.
So, and the work that you're doing is definitely getting after that, right? So I wanted to transition a little bit. We've talked about education, so I'll skip the questions. I think we hit those really good. So the question I have is, Admiral, do you see military members, veterans and their spouses, bringing their knowledge and skills from their military career to a company's workforce, including those in financial services, and making a positive impact? So how do you see us making an impact into the financial services industry based on the skills and attributes that you spoke about for both spouses and active duty and veterans?
One of the thrills of being at the clam bake, and I hope I get invited back, and it was nice to go to a clam bake that actually had clams. Um, uh, but one of the real thrills for me was to see the number of people there who are actually in financial services that were either veterans themselves or were employers who were pulling veterans into the space. Obviously, there's a lot of places to go work, when you leave. But this area is a particularly challenging one because it's not well known to us inside the military. And I would encourage leaders to I mean, part of what I've learned in the veteran space, back to what I said, the phone stops ringing on Monday morning. Nobody's knocking on the door. I don't have a schedule. And we're sort of waiting. And my phone didn't ring, so the phone's not going to ring. You've got to actively go after this. And then in particular, it's one thing to transition to an aviation outfit if you're an aircraft mech. I mean, there are sort of, okay, I can see that out there and I kind of know what they do. I mean, aircraft are aircraft, helicopters are helicopters. I've got a skill set that I know I can apply. How do I get into that? The financial services industry is a little different in that regard. And particularly if you have a passion for it and get an education on it. I mean, that's why the education piece is so key, because I think the education piece, in addition to getting smart about it, it will expose you to the industry in a way that you're generally not going to get exposed to in the military. I mean, there are some interfaces, but honestly, and I spent a lot of time with money and budgets in the military, it's just not the same. I'm still, as much experience as I've gotten in the private sector on P&Ls, there's still a disconnect for me between the way I used to do money in the military and really understanding what a P&L is, and what SG&A is, and what does it mean to make a profit, and how do you comply? The whole compliance world, which just is become more and more and more onerous. I mean, the requirements are there, over time. And believe me, what I've seen in the commercial side, on the outside, is we need good people in those businesses, and particularly those that are really interested in that. So how do you get educated about it? How do you find out the opportunities? And that's where you provide such a great service, and actively reaching out to those who are already in it. And the other thing I would hope is those who benefited by this education and those who are in the financial industry call their buddies. One of the things I learned about transition is job fairs don't work. It might make the company feel good they're showing up with a booth. The big national exposure doesn't work. If you want to find vets, find military members and spouses that want to go, that will do your work and take advantage of the opportunities, you got to go where they live. You need to go to the bases. You need to be outside the posts. And if you have a good deal, and you know this Phil, as well as anybody. If you have a good deal, it'll get around the troops like lightning. But you got to be there to do it. They need to know about you. If you expected them to just show up, that's not going to happen. And that's the recruiting piece for those in the financial industry, any industry, but in this case, the finance. Go out and find them. And yes, it may take an effort, and it's going to take a little more education because, by and large, we're not overly familiar with who you are. But for those that you hit it with, man, they will, once they transition and once they're in, they will help your organization take off.
No, definitely thanks for that, because I know, Admiral, you remember from the testimonials that we had there at the clam bake.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just the platoon sergeant, getting his education and getting it for himself, but he's out there talking to the other privates, et cetera, and the other airmen. And they're also educating their kids at the house, right? So that you can have that generational wealth and the knowledge associated with it. So it's several ways to use this education to benefit not only the institution, DOD, but also you as become a better mother, father, et cetera. So definitely a lot of goodness.
Well, and the other thing, Phil, is, and I hope people don't get scared off by this, it's not rocket science. It ain't rocket science. It has its challenges, but it's not rocket science. It's something, particularly if you have an inclination, you can really do well in it, understand it, and really do well, and eventually become a leader, in the financial services industry.
Agreed. So I'd like to transition to these last couple of questions focused on other companies and value of the military. We've talked a little bit about it, but you stated earlier, 100% correct, is that one of the things we don't do well is brag on ourselves and be able to talk about our skills and attributes to other companies, right? So my question is, what advice do you have for those in transition and how they can effectively communicate their skills and value to potential employers?
So one of the hardest things, and this is something you just have to work on, is how do you create the right vocabulary for your skill set that would match up with the vocabulary in the civilian sector. I've seen people put devices together to do that. I mean, there are outfits that do this for a living, but that's really key, is how do you speak the right language that would allow someone to really understand how good you are? That's one. Secondly, because we don't brag on ourselves, we really need to be more forthcoming about how good we are, and we're not very good at that. I get that, but I think that's really key. And oftentimes, where that works, or a way to think about that, is inside families, because spouses can look at how good their spouse is and remind them that they need to think about themselves this way. And I think it goes both ways. Certainly that was the case in my own family. So there's, that's another way to think about it. You depending on what you want to do, but going somewhere that is already succeeding in this, that's got a big vet population, that has a good transition team, and then seeing how you fit in there and asking those questions. One of the things, and this is hard because I know we're looking for work, we've got to put food on the table, we need to get a job, all that pressure's on us. But I would really want you to think, one, you're a lot better than you're saying you are. I know that. This is not about whether they're the right organization for you. This is about whether you are right for them. Is this an organization that's going to value you where you can really make a difference, as opposed to just sort of jumping on a train because it sounds good, I need a job, and so I'm gonna go to work. Going through that, and that can be tough and it can take longer. But the number of first-time employees, veterans who go to a place they think is right and it just doesn't work, it's scary high. It's because we jumped because I need a job, because it just didn't work. because I didn't really understand what I was getting into. So that gets to the diligence. It's worth taking the time to do the best you can to get this right, particularly under the pressure. And it's difficult. Look, I got to get to work here. I need the salary. So those are three ideas on this. How do you translate your skills? Making sure that you're the value, you're the value proposition, not the outfit you're trying to sign up for. And then finding organizations that have sort of a vet cadre that can help you understand the answers to these other questions about whether it's the right place for you.
No, that's great advice because, like you said, sometimes we undervalue, what we actually bring to the fight, and we're a little shy about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's very important for us we want to remain humble, but at the same opportunity, we want to talk about the skills, abilities, and attributes and leadership styles that we've learned through this journey, whether it's 4 years or 40 years, that we can bring and help that organization build. So I think those are great advice.
Hey,
All right,
just one other thing that I'm thinking of. I've been involved with a handful of startups, and it's exciting. And we're living in a world where, again, we talked about change and technology. I would just say, and this is where understanding money is really key, because startups run out of money faster than anybody can understand. So if you're going to go with a startup, have some idea what's going on financially. And one of the things I've learned on the business side, with rare exception, it's not raining money out here. People are making money because they're working hard and making a difference. And it's a lot of hard work. And I have great admiration for people that succeed on the business side. It is truly demanding. So if you're going to jump into a startup and you're an entrepreneur, more power to you. There's great opportunities out there, but it is not a piece of cake. And you need to know where the money is and where it's going and where it's coming from, which means you have to have some kind of skill set on the financial side if you're going to succeed in that space as well.
100%. 100% agree. So I have one more question I want to definitely ask you, and then we have a couple of questions from the Q&A from the field.
Sure.
So, it's important, if there were companies that were listening right now, financial services company looking to hire veterans, why would you say it's important for companies to hire military members, veterans, and spouses? I know we talked about the attributes, but if you were just to say a couple of things to any companies that are listening, what would you say?
Well, usually, and I just go through a list I've written down here, and this has been true for decades and will continue to be true. It's a really good bet for your company. You're going to find individuals who are very proud. I mentioned they're young. One of the things I say about our military is the average age of any unit in our military, whatever the service, is 21 years old. And when you see them in action at that age, they're just breathtaking in that regard. They are loyal, they're team-oriented, they're disciplined, selfless, they lead, they perform really well under pressure. They perform really well in a crisis. Technically, leading edge, they're responsible and accountable individuals, and they can handle change. I mean, those are just a few of the characteristics, but I mean, I'm not making that up. I've seen it over my lifetime. Absolutely those characteristics, as are their spouses. I mean, back in the day, when I came in the military a long time ago, the number of married families, it was like 4%, something like that. We're at 50% now. So those characteristics, including resilience, another one, they bounce back and they love a challenge. So if you want to, you want to hire somebody that's really going to make a difference in your outfit, go in there. And that's not an idea anymore. I've been doing this long enough now who have seen it in the literature and heard it from leaders like Jamie Morgan at JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, sorry, and so many others who've hired vets and have really made it that they've seen it's just been one of the best things they've ever done.
No, that was perfect. Talked about all the attributes of a military member or veteran or spouse and how they can contribute to an organization. And every one of those things I can attest to as well, Admiral. So perfect. So I want to transition in the few minutes that we have left from question from the field. The question is, how do you address resiliency? And you just brought it up. How do you address resiliency and adversity in your personal and professional life?
So, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, when I was a young lieutenant, which is the equivalent of a captain in the Marine Corps, Air Force, and the Army, I had command of a ship, and in the first month, I failed pretty miserably. And it was the first time I'd been in the Navy about 7 years, and it was the first time I'd failed. It's the first time my wife of 3 years saw me fail, and it was a real life's lesson. And when I talk about leadership, inevitably I will start with that story. And if you want to kind of have a fun few minutes, I ended up just before I retired on the David Letterman show, and Letterman was all over this issue, and he'd done his homework. And essentially, it was, well, how could somebody that failed so badly get to where you are? And that's really the lesson. So it's not about the failure. We're human. We're all going to fail. It's about what happens when you fail. And do you learn the lessons? Do you get back up off the deck? And then do you move forward? And I failed there. I also failed in Major Command as a Navy 06 pretty badly in front of the world. The other aspect of those two major failures was there was no way in the world I could have navigated either one of those without mentors. And so having a mentor and being a mentor, the only thing I've ever asked of those that I mentor, and it's hundreds, if not more than that, is that they pay it back. When they are, down the road, when they're in a better position, that they look to those coming behind them and mentor them as well. But in both those cases, so yes, I was resilient, but I didn't have an idea what to do with it. I didn't know what the path was. And had I not had counsel from very close professional friends and mentors, I wouldn't have had a future, because they both said in their own way, look, yeah, this is bad, but you can bounce back from this. They gave me the encouragement. They showed me how to do it. What's the path in the first case when I was young through this morass of bureaucracy to fix your record, which is what I did. But it took me 11 years to recover professionally from that failure when I was a young lieutenant. And a lot of people don't have that kind of patience. I did, because I love what I did and I wanted to come in again. And I was able to bounce back. So that's how I think about that. I certainly, we shouldn't have a strategy for failure, but at the same time, we all fail. And so how do you bounce back? Who do you depend on? Do you have real honest conversations with yourself about what happened? Do you hold yourself? I mean, one of the reasons I love the Navy, because I wanted to be captain of a ship, and I wanted to be captain of the ship because I had full responsibility and I could hold myself accountable. I mean, and I love that challenge, and that's what I learned over time. But more than anything else, from a resilient standpoint, I would point, I mean, there are other aspects of it. Hard jobs. People ask me what the best jobs I ever had. The best job I ever had was chairman. I had no expectation, by the way, that I was going to get that job. It was a complete surprise. Politics in Washington drove that. But it was the hardest job I had. The second hardest job I had was when I was a young 04, and I was a chief engineer on a major combatant, a cruiser in the Navy for 2.5 years. And when I was that 2.5 years, I had nothing left. I had enough energy to get off the ship when I'd been relieved. That was it. So, again, taking hard jobs builds a base of resiliency. And I always had pretty big shoulders. I mean, again, I was calm in a storm. That's just who I was. I think that's really important as a leader. And then I could bear a lot. I mean, that's just it's how I was built. And so you could load me up with an awful lot, and it wouldn't it wouldn't deter me from getting where I wanted to go.
I really love how you talk about failure, right? So we as senior leaders don't always take the opportunity to talk about times where we fail, but you talked about failing forward, right?
Yeah.
Not making the same mistakes.
Yeah.
But so I really appreciate you being candid, being vulnerable and talking about times where you fail, because we need to talk about those things in public. So I really appreciate that, because we need tips. We need to have tips about resiliency and overcoming adversity, because we've all experienced it. How can we not? This many years, you're in the Navy and DoD, and all of our leaders that's on this call. So thank you for that.
Hey, Phil,
So
the
Admiral,
other thing I tell, just quickly, the other thing I tell young people is, and again, I teach 20-year-olds or 21-year-olds, is at this stage in my life, and I'm in the last quarter, however you want to count it, what I value most is faith, family, and friends. And I depend on those, and they are part of my resilience for sure. And what I encourage young ones to do is don't screw any of those up, along the way. Doesn't mean you're not going to have challenges in life. We all are. But sort of at the end game, having those anchors mean more to me than anything else I've done.
Well, you closed it the perfect way, Admiral, because one of the questions I didn't think we were going to get a chance to get to was, what was your leadership philosophy? That was one of the questions that we had, as well as the audience, and the 3 F's, faith, family, and friends. So thanks for ending on that. So we're just about out of time, Admiral. So we wanted to provide an opportunity for you for any closing comments that you may have.
No, I guess I'd go back to where I started. I think what you're doing, I'm so thrilled to be associated with you and the organization. Again, this is Vietnam for me. One of the things I feared the most when the war started in 2003 is we'd blame the military for the wars, which is what we did in Vietnam, and 2, we'd forget about our vets once the wars were over. We haven't done that. There are a lot of really good organizations focused in the veteran space. And again, I just commend you and the team, how important and impactful and meaningful, and doing something bigger than yourself, serving something bigger than yourself. All those kinds of statements that really make a difference in this country. And so I just appreciate the few minutes I had today, and I'm sure there'll be opportunities down the road to continue to engage with you and your team.
Well, Admiral, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. I also want to thank all those who have joined us today. This was an awesome webinar. Admiral, we really appreciate your time, appreciate your advice, appreciate your nuggets, and we look forward to working with you again in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.